Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So it's been quite some time that I built something really fun. So for a couple of weeks, maybe months, I've been basically teaching you guys like some small components and stuff, some GSAP effects, gallery, text effect, image, different sort of animations and stuff. But yeah, I haven't been doing landing page sort of effects or basically the animations, some carousel animations and stuff. So yeah, in this video, we're gonna be building something really fun and something really cool. So we're gonna be building a modern slider, which is this. So let's refresh the page. We have this cool kind of fade in effect with some blur effect. So we can see that we have image of the product, the title, some description, price, and then explore product button, which is big, kind of like the CTA. Now, I could have basically elaborated more like on clicking on this, maybe like open a different panel or sort of like that. But yeah, I just wanted to teach you guys this cool effect or basically the sliding animation. So here when I scroll down, you'd see that the active one basically scales up, hides itself, and then the next one appears. Also for um the subsequent ones, we can see that we have this cool effect, and then when you scroll up, the previous one appears, kind of like it's pretty fun. The image basically scale in size as well as for the text animation. It's pretty fun, pretty modern, and yeah. So as you can see behind, we can see kind of like a gradient blur of the image that we have. So yeah, it's pretty modern, pretty sleek. So the source code is going to be in the description. And yeah, without more delay, let's get started. But before starting, so videos like these definitely take a lot of time to build, edit, and then yeah, release like in a week. So would really appreciate if you guys could comment down what you liked about this, or if you already knew about this or not, because this would help the video reach more audience. And yeah, if you're new to the channel, if you haven't subscribed yet, or if you have been following me for a while, you've been watching my videos and you're liking it, but you haven't subscribed, well, it'd be really nice if you could subscribe to the channel. And yeah, since we're really close to hitting 5,000 subscribers. And also, if you guys haven't noticed, I changed the logo. So comment down if you like the logo or not. I found the older one was pretty boring or so. So yeah, I quickly designed it. Didn't take much. I wanted to have like a new one, definitely not the older one. So yeah, do let me know in the comments if you liked it or not. So yeah, without more delay, let's get started and let's learn to build this cool modern slider. All right, so here I'm in my cursor and I have my folder open, which has 7 images, one logo, index.html file, script.js, and then style.css. Now let's go one by one and see what we have in there. So the index.html file is pretty standard. We have some basic uh, code here. So we've just linked the style.css file, and also we have, since we're going to be using Swiper.js for the slider, so I've imported the, basically I've added the CDN for the minified CSS for Swiper, and then also I've added the minified JavaScript for Swiper as well, and then I've linked the script.js as well. Now, if you look at the element inside of the body, we have a main tag within which we have our logo, and then the logo is an image, so we're using image tag. That's basically what we have in the HTML. And then for the style tag, we have some styling that we'll have to go a bit deep to understand what's actually happening. The first thing first is we have imported 2 different fonts. The first one is Roboto Condensed, and then we also have Poppins as well. So yeah, and then here we have a bunch of CSS variables. So let's go one by one what we have. The first one is the transition duration. So we basically, since instead of like writing it down multiple times, we can have a single variable to use in multiple places, and also it's easier to change in one single place, and then the entire um the entire project would basically get updated. And then we also have transition timing, which is ease. We have a base scale of 0.5, an active scale of 2, next scale 1.6, next plus scale of 0.9, base blur, next blur, and next plus blur, and then blur effect. So these are quite a lot of variables to digest. But once we start building it, I'll be explaining you one by one what these variables do. But apart from that, we just remove the default margin and padding and set the box sizing to border box. And then for the body, main, and swiper, so since we're going to be adding the swiper slides, so we also give the swiper a height and width of 100 viewport height and 100 viewport width. Font family is this. And then here as well, the main and swiper gets like height width 100%. The swiper has overflow hidden. And then we just style the image inside of the logo. And then for each individual slide, we just center everything using display flex, justify content center, and align items to center. That's basically what we have. But we have yet to add these swiper slides in our HTML. Now, if you look at the JavaScript, we already have some initialization and then basically the swiper working. So before we see the result of the code that we have, let's first look at what we are in. So basically what we have in the browser. So let me open the Chrome, and this is what we have. So we have our logo position here, and yeah, that's basically what we have. So I'm not too focused about the logo, since the main thing that I wanted to teach in this video was to build something like this. So yeah, this is the finished one, by the way. So yeah. Um so yeah, instead of adding the slides using JavaScript, which we can do, we'll just add it here in the index.html. So first, what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be adding the swiper div, which would hold all the different swiper slides. Then inside of that, we have the swiper wrapper. Now keep in mind that these class names are basically predefined by the swiper slider, and these are not something that I've made up. So yeah, you basically, if you want to use swiper, you'd have to use these classes, by the way. And then you have swiper wrapper. And then inside of that, you have all the different swiper slides. So first, let's make one single slide and let's see the structure of the slide. So the slide, basically, let me show you the finished one. So if you look at here, basically the slides don't have much, so this entire thing can be as a slide content. And then we have this image, and then behind that we have this blur kind of thing, which is this exact image itself. So the image is repeated twice, one for the actual image, then the second one is for the blurred one, and then we have the content here. So we just need 3 divs. So first we'd need this slide content, we'd need the slide image, which is the actual image, and then the slide image blur. Within the content, we have the info, wherein in the info, we just have the H2 and then a P for the paragraph. And then we have the pricing and then the button. Now, inside of this button, we have the text inside of a span and then the SVG, which is the icon, basically. And that's basically what we have. And then for the image, we just add the actual image, and then for the image blur as well, we paste that in and let's save. So we have 2 images repeated. All right. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pasting in the other 6 slides. Let's save, and this is how it looks. Now, since we have here mouse wheel as true, so when we scroll our mouse up and down, it basically moves to the previous and the next slide. We have slides per view as 4, so we can see 4 slides in one single view. The speed is 1500, which means 1.5 seconds. So basically, when we slide from one slide to another, the transition time basically is 1.5 seconds, sort of. The space between each individual slides is 0, so we don't want any gap between each slide, so there's that. And then we have loop to true, meaning that when it ends or reaches the final slide and you scroll again, it would start again from the first one. So basically it goes on around the circle. So that's basically the a basic structure. Let's add CSS to make it look as the final project. So we have your swiper slide. First, let's add some base styling to the images. Now, there's a very crucial logic that I wanted to basically the idea behind this animation, sort of. So here what you can see is, so when you use swiper slide, and let me just open the network tab. Let me open it here. So let me hover over any one single slide. All right. So as you can see, so you have one slide as active, and then just before that is prev, and then the next one as next. Rest have the swiper slide. Even these have swiper slide class, but then these have extra extra classes. The previous one has swiper slide prev, and then the active one has swiper slide active, and then the next one has swiper slide next. So when we slide through these sliders, so what exactly happens is the previous one goes off screen. So this animation thing that happens, we can't really have it with the previous one, since when you scroll it, it basically goes off screen. Well, even though you can add it using paddings and stuff, but I didn't want to do it that way. So what we have is, so we basically use the active slide as the previous slide. And by that, I mean, so here, the one that you're seeing now on the screen, it might seem that this is the active one, but this is actually the next one. The active one gets hidden. So when I scroll, now the active one is the green one that we had before. It's just that it's hidden so we can't see. And then instead of that, we have the next slide shown up, and then the next slide content. So it's pretty nice, and I think this gets the job pretty well. So what we have to do is we have to ignore the previous one, and we have to play around with the active one and make it look as if this is the previous one. The next one is basically the active one, and then the slide that comes next to it is basically the next one. It might be a bit complicated. I mean, it sounds so, but yeah, shouldn't be that difficult. It's pretty straightforward in my opinion. So here we'll just add some base styling to the images first. So for all the slide image divs inside of all these different swiper slide, we're gonna have a width of 300 pixels, aspect ratio of 1, meaning that they kind of look like a square. And then for all the different images, we want to add a filter blur. Now you would say that, well, we don't have filter blur on all the different images. Well, yeah, that's true. But we'll just remove this filter blur for the next slide, and then we're going to keep it so for the all the different slides. So here we're targeting it for the base or all of the different slide images, and we're going to give a blur to all the different slide image. We'll just remove the blur only on the next image or so. So here we add the filter blur as the base blur, which we defined here, which is of 20 pixels. Transition of all, and then we have the transition duration, and then the transition timing basically. Now the transition timing is basically ease. Now you can change it here as is, in, out, or whatever. So I'll just keep it as is. And then we also want to basically scale down the image. So we want the image to be base scale. Now the base scale is 0.5. And when I save, let's look at our one. So as you can see, we have these made pretty small. Now you may think, well, we already have these images big. What are we going to be doing with these? So these are basically the blur images, which shows up for each individual active ones, which we're going to be styling in a bit. So yeah, for now we can see that the actual images are blurred out, and then also the sizes are pretty small now. Next thing that we're going to do is also we want to have the opacity as 1, and then we want to translate along the x-axis as 50%. Now if we look at here, the images are basically sort of like at the right side aligned so that we can have the text on the left. So we want them to translate as well. So we have translate x as 50%. Let's save, And yeah, now you can see that we have the previous one also show up here, since the slide basically translated 50% in the x-axis. Then we target the actual image inside of the slide image. We give it width and height 100% and object fit of contain. And then we target the blur image base styles. So we target the image blurs. We give them opacity of 0. Let's save. And as you can see that we don't have the blur images. The blur images are now hidden. We set them as position absolute. Now, why do we set them as position absolute? Since we want them to be positioned at the right corner. So yeah. Then we target the active slide. The active slide is the one that needs to be active, but we're going to be using it as basically we're going to be faking it. So we target the active class, swiper slide active, and we target the image inside of that. We scale it up big. Now the active scale is pretty big, by the way. It's twice the actual size. So we're going to scale it twice. So the reason for having it bigger is because if we don't have it big, we can't see this image. When we scroll down, it becomes the previous one. We can't see it become big. So that's why we need the scaling for this as 2. Translate x as -60. So when it goes to the left side, we want it to translate x-axis with -60, and then opacity becomes 0. So let's save. Now here, so refresh. If I scroll, we can't see much because the image have an opacity, and also they have blur, so they're not visible much, but it'll be clear once we have the next image. And so now we target the next slide. Now the next slide would have the slide image, and then the filter blur for this would be next blur. Now the next blur is 0, so we won't have any filter blur. And then the scaling of this would be 1.6, a little less than the active one. And then the transform translate x would be 20% for this. And then opacity would be 1. Let's save. As you can see, we can see this image here fades in, the next one comes in, then the next one, so on and so forth. Nice, right? Now let's target the swiper slide next and the image blur. The image blur would have an opacity of 0.5. Now keep in mind that we totally have hidden that for all the different image blurs. But for the next slide, we want to show that specific image blur, and then would have the opacity of 0.5. The blur would be blur effect, which is around 50 pixels. Let's save. As you can see, we can see the blur here. There's the another one. All right, it's pretty nice. All right. And then we want it behind, so we have z index as -1. And then we transform translate, and then just basically position it 100%, right? So it basically translates along the x-axis, and it's here. And then we target the actual image inside of that, and we scale that up a bit as well. So we use the active scaling and scale that image as well a bit. So it's now a bit bigger. Now we target the next plus slide. So here, if you see, this image is the next one. This one is the next plus one. And then this one is the next plus 2 or whatever. But are we really going to be using next plus 2? Well, no. So first, let's make this next plus 1 a bit bigger compared to the next plus 2. So here, to see the actual size, we need to first remove these content, since they're making it hard to see the actual sizes. So for this, I'm going to be coming here, and let me just add the style tag here directly. And here, we're going to be targeting the slide content, and we're going to be adding display as none. I save. All right, now we can see the actual sizes of the images, and they look pretty good. All right, next thing that we're going to be doing is we target the next slide +1. The way we target the next one is using the next sibling selector. So we have the next slide, and then the swiper slide just next to it is we use this plus, and then the swiper slide. Basically, right after the next swiper slide, the swiper slide that comes next to it is basically what we want to target. And then the slide image that we have inside of that, the next +1, we add the filter blur. So the next plus blur would be a bit, so we have a blur of 10 pixels for that. And then the scaling would be as this, which is the next plus scale, which is 0.9. So next one would have 1.6, the next +1 would be 0.9, and then the base, which is the next +2 basically, or all the other ones, is 0.5. Opacity would be 1. Save. As you can see now, this is bigger, this is slightly less, and then this is the smallest one. Now we basically translate these slides just so that we can have enough room here to add the text content, or basically the slide content. So for that, we target the next slide, we translate it along the x-axis as 50%, we target the next +1 slide and translate it along x with 30%. Let's save, and now looks better. Pretty nice. Now all we have to do is add the slide content styling. So for the slide content styling, let's remove this, or else we won't be seeing it. All right. Now the slide content, so we'll basically be adding the position of absolute with opacity of 0. Let's save. It's basically hidden. We want to show content only for the next one. So we have the opacity here as 0, filter blur as 20 pixels, which here you could use the variables. But yeah, so initially I didn't plan on adding the content here, but then later I changed my mind. So yeah, I didn't use the variables here, but this is kind of like a task for you. You guys can basically add the variables here instead of the flat value. And then the transition would be opacity. So for this transition, we target the opacity and then the blur. And then basically the duration would be the transition duration. And then the effect would be ease in out. The width of this would be 35 viewport width. And then for the next swiper slide, we target the content and we translate it along the x-axis as -80% with opacity of 1, filter blur as 0. Let's save. Now we see the content. Pretty nice. Now let's style the slide content. So we have the H2, we give it font size, margin bottom. We have the P tag, font family, font size, a color, and then the price would be a bit bigger with the margin block, basically margin top and bottom, font weight, color, and then the button, actual button, which has the text as well as the SVG. We don't want the background, no border. Font family is this, font weight is this, flex with font size 18 pixels, text transform as uppercase. SVG would have a width and height of this and a margin left of 10 pixels. Let's save, and we have it. So yeah, so that's it for this video. We have our cool modern slider ready. Looks pretty sleek and is pretty nice. So the source code is going to be in the description. Now also you guys should keep in mind that this is not responsive at all. Now if you want to make it responsive, the task is for you. And yeah, if you want a tutorial on how to make stuff like these responsive, you can comment down below. Also comment down what you liked about this video, if you already knew this stuff like these, if this was helpful to you or not. And if you're new to the channel, if you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn the notifications bell, because I bring in cool stuff like these every week. So yeah, that's it for this video. Meet you guys in the next. Till then, bye bye, take care, and peace.